You're done here. Lily. Security will escort you out. The words echoed through Gate 47 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, loud enough that every passenger waiting for Flight 2847 to Los Angeles turned to stare. Richard Morrison stood there in his $1,000 suit, arms crossed, with that cold executive smile that had probably crushed dozens of careers before this moment. Lily Harrison felt her legs go weak. She was 29 years old, 5 months pregnant, and until 30 seconds ago, she'd been the senior operations coordinator for Morrison Global Logistics, managing the company's entire Midwest airport operations. Now she was standing in the middle of a crowded terminal, her tablet still in her hands, while her boss publicly stripped away everything she'd worked 6 years to build. "Richard, please," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady even as passengers pulled out their phones. "Can we discuss this in the office? There are people here. That's exactly why we're doing it here." Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping just low enough that only she could hear the venom underneath. "I want everyone to see what happens when someone like you forgets their place. Someone like you." The words hung in the air like poison. "My name is Lily Harrison, and 6 years ago I walked into Morrison Global Logistics as a junior coordinator making $35,000 a year. I had a degree in supply chain management from a state school, student loans that kept me awake at night, and a dream of proving that a black girl from the South Side could make it in corporate America." Richard Morrison had looked at my resume for maybe 30 seconds before hiring me, probably to fill some diversity quota, but I'd worked harder than anyone else in that building. I'd stayed late, came in early, fixed problems that weren't even mine to fix, and turned our chaotic Midwest operations into the most efficient region in the entire company. Last year, I saved Morrison Global $2.3 million by redesigning our cargo routing system. Richard took credit for it in front of the board and got a $400,000 bonus. I got a coffee mug that said team player and a 2% raise. 3 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. 2 months ago, I told Richard. Last week, he started documenting every tiny mistake I made, building a file, preparing for this exact moment. "Security!" Richard called out, waving toward 2 airport security officers who'd been watching the scene unfold. "This former employee's refusing to leave company property." "This is an airport," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "It's not company property. Our operations desk is company property," Richard shot back. "And you no longer have authorization to be near it. Hand over your tablet, your badge, and your access card. Now." The passengers were fully engaged now, some recording, some whispering, all watching this pregnant black woman being humiliated by her white boss in designer shoes. Lily could feel the judgment, the pity, the assumptions forming in real time. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell every single person watching that she'd built this operation from chaos into excellence, that Richard couldn't even read a logistics report without her translating it into simple terms, that she'd worked through morning sickness and exhaustion and back pain while he'd taken 3-hour lunches and blamed her when his mistakes created problems. But screaming wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't help. Fighting wouldn't help. So Lily took a breath, placed her hand on her belly where her daughter was growing, and made a decision that would change everything. She handed over the tablet. She unclipped her badge. She pulled the access card from her wallet. But before she handed them to Richard, she looked him directly in the eyes and said something that made his smirk falter for just a second. "I've been recording everything." Richard's face twitched. "What?" "Every meeting. Every conversation. Every comment you thought nobody else heard." Lily's voice was calm now, steady with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing you're holding cards your opponent can't see. 6 years of recordings. Timestamps, witnesses, documentation, everything. She could see the calculation happening behind Richard's eyes, the sudden flicker of doubt, but he recovered quickly, laughing loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You're bluffing. And even if you're not, nobody's going to believe some disgruntled employee with an agenda." He snatched the items from her hands. "Now get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." Lily gathered her purse and her coat, moving slowly, deliberately, while Richard watched her like a predator making sure wounded prey actually leaves the territory. The security officers didn't escort her. They just stood there, uncomfortable witnesses to corporate cruelty playing out in public. As Lily walked toward the exit, she heard Richard's voice behind her, addressing the crowd with practiced charm. Sorry about the disruption, folks. Sometimes you have to deal with personnel issues quickly. But don't worry, Morrison Global always puts service first. Your flight will depart on time. Several passengers nodded, already forgetting the pregnant woman who just lost everything right in front of them. But not everyone forgot. A young black woman in a business suit caught Lily's eye as she passed, mouthing two words. Record everything. Lily nodded slightly, kept walking, and didn't let herself cry until she reached the parking garage. She sat in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, the car she'd been driving since college because she couldn't afford anything better, and let the tears come. Not just for the job she'd lost or the humiliation she'd endured, but for the fear that was now clawing at her chest. She was 5 months pregnant. She had $8,400 in savings. Her rent was $1,850 a month. Her health insurance was tied to the job she'd just lost. And the man who destroyed her career was already back inside the terminal, probably laughing with his management team about how easily he'd disposed of her. But Richard Morrison had made one critical mistake in his moment of victory. He'd assumed Lily was bluffing about the recordings. She wasn't. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Janelle, who worked in HR at a law firm downtown. Girl, someone just sent me a video of what happened. Please tell me you documented everything like I told you to. Lily looked at her phone, at the cloud storage icon showing 847 files backed up and secured. At the legal consultation appointment she'd scheduled 2 weeks ago when she'd first sensed what Richard was planning. At the email draft addressed to the EEOC that she'd been too scared to send. Until now. She wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. And anger, when it's righteous and backed by evidence, is a powerful thing. Lily wiped her eyes, started her car, and began making calls. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling that burn of injustice, that knot in your stomach that demands something be done, then you already understand why what happened next at Morrison Global Logistics would become a case study in how one woman's courage can dismantle an entire culture of cruelty. Stay with me. Lily read it on her phone while lying in bed, unable to sleep for the third night in a row. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling her daughter kick, while her eyes scanned words clearly written by Morrison Global's legal team. Immediate cease and desist regarding any recordings allegedly made on company property without consent. Violation of Illinois wiretapping laws. Pursuing criminal charges and civil damages. Surrender all materials within 48 hours or face prosecution. So, Richard had been busy, not just firing her, but now trying to make sure she'd be too terrified to fight back. He'd escalated from public humiliation to legal threats, gambling that a pregnant woman with no income would fold under pressure rather than risk criminal charges. Lily's phone rang. She almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made her pick up. Miss Harrison? This is Patricia Chen from Chen & Associates Employment Law. Janelle Williams referred you to us. I just saw the cease and desist letter Morrison Global sent you. The woman's voice was sharp, professional, and carried an edge of barely contained anger. Don't respond to it. Don't delete anything. And definitely don't surrender those recordings. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m.? Yes, but I should tell you, I can't afford. We'll discuss payment later. Right now, what I need from you is every single piece of documentation you have. Everything. Patricia paused. Miss Harrison, I've been practicing employment law for 18 years. What happened to you at that airport is one of the most blatant cases of discrimination I've seen. And that cease and desist letter? That's Richard Morrison panicking because he knows exactly what's on those recordings. The next morning, Lily sat in a sleek conference room in the Loop, her old laptop open, while Patricia Chan and her associate, Marcus Webb, listened to audio file after audio file. March 14th. Executive meeting. Richard's voice, casual and loud. Look, I'm not saying we don't hire them. I'm saying we need to be strategic about where they're positioned. Customer-facing roles need a certain polish, you know what I mean? We can't have our clients thinking we're running some kind of charity operation. June 3rd performance review. Lily. You're doing fine work, but let's be realistic about your career trajectory here. Management positions require a certain executive presence. Maybe focus on supporting roles where you're more comfortable. August 22nd, after she announced her pregnancy. Richard to another manager, not knowing Lily's phone was recording in her purse on the desk. 5 months along? Jesus Christ. We need to start transitioning her responsibilities before she turns into a liability. Pregnant women are useless in high-pressure operations. She'd be crying in the bathroom or calling in sick every other day. Start documenting everything. Build a file. We'll cut her loose before she can take maternity leave and cost us money. Marcus stopped the playback, his jaw tight. How many recordings do you have like this? 87 that directly reference my race, gender, or pregnancy. Maybe 300 more showing patterns of discriminatory treatment. Lily's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. I started recording after my second year when I realized Richard took credit for my work in front of executives, but belittled me in private meetings. Then it became about survival. About having proof that I wasn't crazy, that this was really happening. Patricia leaned back in her chair, a smile spreading across her face that would have terrified Richard Morrison if he could have seen it. Miss Harrison, you've just handed me a case that will make partners at every employment law firm in Chicago jealous. She pulled out a legal pad, already making notes. Here's what's going to happen. We're filing with the EEOC today. We're filing a lawsuit in federal court for pregnancy discrimination, racial discrimination, hostile work environment, and retaliation. And we're going to make sure every single one of those recordings becomes part of the public record. But the cease and desist letter said, Illinois is a two-party consent state for recordings, yes. But there's an exception for documenting illegal activity. Patricia's eyes gleamed. Discrimination is illegal. You weren't secretly recording random conversations. You were gathering evidence of ongoing civil rights violations. Any half-competent judge will rule those recordings admissible, and Morrison Global's lawyers know it. That's why they're threatening you. They're hoping you'll panic and destroy the evidence before we can use it. Over the next week, while Richard Morrison returned to his corner office believing he'd successfully eliminated a problem employee, Lily's world shifted in ways he couldn't have imagined. The EEOC complaint was filed. The federal lawsuit followed. And then Patricia did something that changed the entire trajectory of the case. She contacted the media. Not tabloid gossip shows, but serious journalists who covered corporate discrimination, labor violations, and civil rights issues. She gave them carefully selected excerpts from the recordings, enough to paint a picture without compromising the legal case. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Tech logistics firm accused of pregnancy discrimination. Racist comments captured in secret recordings. By Tuesday afternoon, Morrison Global stock had dropped 7%. By Wednesday, 3 board members had called emergency meetings. By Thursday, Richard Morrison's corporate email was flooded with messages from investors, clients, and executives demanding explanations. And then the floodgates opened. Former employees started coming forward. Women who'd been passed over for promotions. Black workers who'd been funneled into lower-paying positions. A Hispanic woman who'd been fired 2 weeks after returning from maternity leave. An Asian operations manager who'd been told he didn't have American leadership qualities. Morrison Global wasn't just dealing with one lawsuit anymore. They were dealing with a pattern. But Richard Morrison still didn't understand what he was facing. On Friday evening, Lily received a phone call from a blocked number. She almost didn't answer, but Patricia had told her to document everything. Lily. Richard's voice, trying to sound friendly, reasonable. Look, this has gotten out of hand. You're upset, I get it. The airport thing was handled poorly. But these lawsuits, the media? You're destroying your own reputation. Nobody's going to hire someone who sues their employer. Lily stayed silent, letting him talk, the recording app active on her phone. Here's what I'm offering. $200,000. You sign an NDA, drop everything, and we both move on. You'll never have to work again if you invest it, right? You can focus on being a mom, which is what you wanted anyway, right? There it was. The assumption that being a mother was lesser. That money could buy silence. That she would trade justice for survival. Richard. Lily said quietly. Do you remember what you said to me in March? In the executive meeting about strategic positioning of employees? Silence on the line. He didn't remember. He'd said so many casually racist things that they'd all blurred together for him. You said customer-facing roles need polish. That we can't look like a charity operation. Lily's voice hardened. I have that recording, Richard. I have all of them. And you know what's interesting? Your wife serves on the board of the Chicago Urban Education Initiative. The one that gives scholarships to underprivileged kids, black and brown kids mostly. Wonder how she'd feel knowing what you really think about people who look like them. Are you threatening me? Richard's friendly mask cracked, venom seeping through. No, I'm explaining why I'm not taking your money. Lily felt her daughter kick, strong and insistent. You thought firing me publicly would break me. You thought legal threats would scare me. You thought offering money would buy my silence. But you never actually knew me, Richard. You never bothered to learn who I was beyond your assumptions. You're making a huge mistake. I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure we both know you're already losing. That's why you're calling me at night trying to settle. That's why your stock dropped. That's why board members are asking questions. Lily paused. I'll see you in court. She hung up. Her phone immediately rang again. Blocked number. She declined it. It rang 5 more times before stopping. Then a text from an unknown number. You're going to regret this, Lily. I promise you that. She screenshotted it and sent it to Patricia with a note. Richard just made another mistake. That weekend, Lily sat in her small apartment, eating cereal for dinner because it was all she could afford, and read through messages of support flooding her social media from women she'd never met. From other whistleblowers. From lawyers offering help. From advocacy organizations asking her to speak at events. She was broke, pregnant, unemployed, and facing down a powerful corporation with unlimited legal resources. But she wasn't alone anymore. And Richard Morrison, sitting in his lakefront penthouse that weekend, surrounded by expensive furniture and success he'd built on the backs of people he considered beneath him, made a decision that would prove to be his final, fatal error. He decided to go on the offensive, to attack Lily's credibility publicly, to paint her as a disgruntled employee with an agenda, to use his connections and his money and his power to crush her completely. Because men like Richard Morrison never learned the most important lesson about power. It only works when people are afraid of you. And Lily Harrison had stopped being afraid the moment she pressed record for the first time. Richard Morrison held a press conference on a Tuesday morning at Morrison Global's downtown headquarters. Lily watched it live from her apartment, her laptop balanced on her growing belly, while Janelle sat beside her on the couch eating pizza they'd split because neither could afford lunch out anymore. Richard stood behind a podium with the company logo gleaming behind him, flanked by 2 attorneys in expensive suits and Morrison Global's VP of Human Resources, a white woman named Catherine who'd ignored Lily's complaints for years. We want to address the recent allegations made by a former employee, Richard began, his voice carrying that practiced executive tone of concern and authority. Morrison Global Logistics has a proud 40-year history of equal opportunity employment. We have a diverse workforce, robust anti-discrimination policies, and a zero-tolerance approach to any form of harassment or bias. Janelle snorted. He's reading from a script his lawyers wrote 10 minutes before this. The decision to terminate Miss Harrison's employment was based solely on documented performance issues and policy violations that accumulated over several months. Her pregnancy had absolutely nothing to do with this decision. Richard glanced at his notes. We have extensive documentation showing a pattern of missed deadlines, inadequate supervision, and failure to meet operational standards. That's a lie, Lily whispered. But her voice lacked conviction, because she knew how this worked. Richard had power, money, lawyers, and a PR team. He could craft whatever narrative he wanted, and most people would believe him because believing him was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths about how the world actually worked. Furthermore, Richard continued, the recordings Miss Harrison allegedly made were obtained illegally without consent, in clear violation of Illinois wiretapping statutes. We are pursuing both criminal and civil action to ensure that this kind of corporate espionage is appropriately punished. The press conference went on for another 20 minutes, with Richard painting himself as the victim of a vindictive former employee trying to extort money from a successful company. Several reporters asked tough questions, but Richard deflected smoothly, his lawyers jumping in whenever things got uncomfortable. When it ended, Lily closed her laptop and stared at the blank screen. "He's good," she said quietly. "He sounds so reasonable, so professional. People are going to believe him." "Some people will," Janelle agreed. "But not everyone. And definitely not the people who matter." Her phone rang. "Patricia Chun, did you watch?" Lily asked. "Every second." "And I'm smiling." Patricia's voice carried an edge of excitement. "He just made 3 critical mistakes. First, he claimed your firing was based on documented performance issues. We're going to subpoena all those documents, and I guarantee they were fabricated after the fact. Second, he mentioned criminal action for the recordings, which means he's doubling down on a legal theory that won't hold up in court. And third, he went on camera and made specific factual claims that we can disprove with evidence. But people believe him. I can already see comments online saying I'm just playing the race card, that I'm trying to get money." "Lily, listen to me." Patricia's voice turned serious. "Public opinion doesn't win cases. Evidence does. And right now, while Richard's doing press conferences, we're doing something much more important. We're building an ironclad case. Speaking of which, I need you to come to the office tomorrow. There's someone you need to meet." The next day, Lily walked into Patricia's conference room to find 3 other women already seated at the table. The first was Denise Carter, 47, who'd worked as a senior logistics analyst at Morrison Global for 12 years before being pushed out 6 months after her second child was born. "They told me I wasn't committed enough anymore," Denise explained, her voice bitter. "Never mind that I'd brought in 3 major contracts the year before. The minute I needed flexible hours for childcare, I became expendable." The second was Yuki Tanaka, 33, who'd been hired as an operations manager with promises of rapid advancement. 2 years in the same position while white men hired after me got promoted past me," she said. "When I asked about it, Richard told me I was too soft for senior leadership. That Asian women make good assistants but don't have the aggression needed for executive roles." The third was Maria Gonzalez, 29. Who'd been fired 3 days after filing a complaint about a male supervisor's inappropriate comments. "Al told me I was being too sensitive," Maria said. "That I needed to learn to take a joke if I wanted to succeed in a male-dominated industry." Patricia stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, looking like a general surveying her troops before battle. "Richard Morrison thinks he's fighting one disgruntled employee with a phone full of recordings. What he doesn't know is that we're building a class action lawsuit documenting systematic discrimination across his entire company." She gestured to the women at the table. 4 plaintiffs so far. But I've been contacted by 7 others who are considering joining. And once this goes public, truly public, not just his version at a press conference, I expect that number to grow. Over the next 2 weeks, Lily's case transformed from a single lawsuit into something much larger. Patricia's firm worked around the clock, gathering evidence, deposing witnesses, building a timeline of discriminatory practices that stretched back years. Meanwhile, Richard Morrison continued his media campaign, appearing on a local business podcast to discuss the challenges of managing in today's litigious environment, and posting on LinkedIn about Morrison Global's commitment to diversity with photos of the company's few non-white employees positioned prominently in the frame. But cracks were starting to show. A mid-level manager named David Park, who'd worked at Morrison Global for 8 years, reached out to Patricia with his own recordings. "I kept them because I thought I was going crazy," he told Lily when they met. "Richard would say things in closed-door meetings that made my skin crawl, but then present this perfect corporate image publicly. I documented everything thinking maybe someday it would matter." His recordings were devastating. Richard discussing cultural fit as code for racial preference. Richard instructing managers to find legal ways to avoid promoting women of childbearing age. Richard joking about the diversity hire quota we have to meet to keep the board happy. Then a former client came forward. James Wellington, CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company, had terminated his contract with Morrison Global 6 months earlier. "I was at a dinner meeting with Richard," James explained in his written statement. "He'd had several drinks and started complaining about his problem employees. He specifically mentioned a pregnant black woman in operations who he was planning to fire. He laughed about it, said she should be grateful she got to play corporate for a few years before going back to where she belonged. I ended our contract the next week and told him exactly why. I should have reported it then, but I didn't want the hassle. I'm reporting it now." Patricia added James's statement to the growing mountain of evidence. But the most unexpected ally came from inside Morrison Global itself. Her name was Rebecca Morrison, Richard's younger sister, who served as VP of International Operations and had been quietly documenting her brother's behavior for 3 years. She contacted Patricia through an intermediary, requesting a confidential meeting. Lily wasn't sure whether to trust her after all. She was a Morrison, but Patricia insisted they listen. Rebecca met them at a coffee shop in Evanston, far from Morrison Global's offices, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She was 42, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from old money and good schools. "I need you to understand something," Rebecca said without preamble. "I love my brother, but I can't defend what he's doing anymore. I've spent 3 years trying to reform company culture from the inside, implementing policies, pushing for accountability. And Richard has undermined every single effort." She slid a USB drive across the table. Internal emails, HR complaints that were buried, performance reviews showing clear patterns of bias, financial documents showing pay disparities between white employees and employees of color in identical positions, and recordings of board meetings where Richard explicitly discussed strategies for avoiding discrimination. Lawsuits. Lily stared at the USB drive like it might explode. "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca removed her sunglasses, and Lily saw genuine pain in her eyes. "Because my daughter is 6 years old, and I don't want her growing up in a world where men like my brother face no consequences for their cruelty." She paused. "Also because our father built this company on principles Richard has completely abandoned. Dad would be ashamed of what Morrison Global has become." Patricia pocketed the USB drive. "You understand this makes you a witness. Richard will know the information came from you." "I know. I've already contacted my own attorney. I'm resigning from Morrison Global effective next week and divesting my shares." Rebecca looked directly at Lily. "I can't undo what happened to you, but I can make sure the truth comes out." After Rebecca left, Lily sat in the coffee shop staring at her untouched lot, trying to process what had just happened. "She just handed us a nuclear weapon," Patricia said quietly. "Internal company documents, board meeting recordings. This isn't just discrimination anymore. This is corporate conspiracy to violate civil rights laws." Lily's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she recognized the writing style immediately. "Richard, heard you're recruiting other liars to join your little crusade. Doesn't matter. You're still going to lose. I have resources you can't imagine. Enjoy poverty and unemployment. It's where you belong." She showed the text to Patricia, who smiled grimly. "Screenshot that and send it to me. He keeps providing evidence of retaliation. It's like he can't help himself." That night, Lily lay in bed feeling her daughter move inside her, stronger now at 6 months, and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 2 months ago, she'd been a corporate employee trying to survive in a toxic workplace. Now she was the lead plaintiff in what might become one of the largest employment discrimination cases in Illinois history. Her savings were almost gone. She was living off loans from Janelle and her mother, eating cheap food, cutting every possible expense. Her apartment lease was up in 2 months, and she had no idea how she'd afford to renew it. But she had something more valuable than money now. She had allies. She had evidence. And she had a legal team that believed her. Richard Morrison had more wealth, more power, more connections, and more resources. But he'd made one fatal miscalculation in his privileged, insulated life. He'd assumed that Lily Harrison was alone. That she was weak. That she would eventually break under pressure and disappear, quietly like all the other employees he'd crushed over the years. He'd never considered that sometimes the people you underestimate are the most dangerous. Patricia called the next morning with news that sent chills down Lily's spine. The Department of Labor just opened an investigation into Morrison Global based on our complaint. And the EEOC is fast-tracking your case, which almost never happens. Someone high up is paying attention. Patricia paused. Lily, we have a mediation hearing scheduled in 3 weeks. Richard's lawyers are pushing for settlement. They want to make this go away before it gets bigger. What do? We walk into that room with every piece of evidence we have, and we make Richard Morrison understand exactly what he's facing. Not a nuisance lawsuit from one disgruntled employee. A systematic pattern of discrimination that could cost him everything. Lily looked around her tiny apartment, at the baby clothes she'd started buying from thrift stores, at the bills piling up on her kitchen counter, at the eviction notice she'd received yesterday that she'd been too scared to open. Let's destroy him, she said quietly. And for the first time since that day at the airport, Lily Harrison smiled. The mediation hearing week 7, the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Klachinsky Federal Building, could have fit Lily's entire apartment inside it twice. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's skyline, and the polished table probably cost more than she'd earned in her first year at Morrison Global. Richard Morrison sat across from her, flanked by 4 attorneys in suits that screamed billable hours. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man attending a minor inconvenience before getting back to important matters. He hadn't even glanced at Lily when he'd walked in. Catherine from HR sat beside him, along with Morrison Global's general counsel, a silver-haired man named Thomas Berkshire who specialized in making problems disappear. On Lily's side, Patricia Chen, Marcus Webb, and a young associate named Sarah Kim, who'd been organizing evidence for weeks. The federal mediator, Judge Harold Stevens, sat at the head of the table reviewing documents with an expression that gave nothing away. Let's begin, Judge Stevens said. Mr. Berkshire, I understand your clients wish to make an opening settlement offer. Thomas stood, radiating expensive competence. Your Honor, Morrison Global is prepared to offer Miss Harrison a settlement of $350,000 in exchange for dismissal of all claims, a mutual non-disparagement agreement and standard confidentiality provisions. $350,000. More money than Lily had ever imagined having. Enough to support her daughter for years. Enough to make all the stress and fear and uncertainty disappear. She felt Patricia's hand briefly touch her arm under the table. A reminder, they'd discussed this moment. My client declines, Patricia said firmly. Richard's head snapped up, actually looking at Lily for the first time. You're joking, Mr. Morrison, Judge Stevens said sharply. You'll address comments through counsel. Thomas leaned over, whispering urgently to Richard, who shook his head in disbelief. $500,000, Thomas announced. Final offer. That's more than generous for what amounts to a standard termination dispute. Standard termination? Patricia's voice could have cut glass. Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to present evidence showing exactly how standard this termination was. Judge Stevens nodded. Proceed. Patricia opened her laptop, connecting it to the room's display system. What you're about to hear are excerpts from recordings Ms. Harrison made documenting systematic discrimination at Morrison Global Logistics. These recordings span 6 years and include conversations with Mr. Morrison, other executives, and HR personnel. She pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, casual and clear. Look, I'm not saying we don't hire them, I'm saying we need to be strategic about where they're positioned. Customer-facing roles need a certain polish. You know what I mean? Thomas's face went pale. Catherine suddenly became very interested in her notepad. Patricia played another clip, then another. Each one more damning than the last. Richard discussing the diversity hire quota. Richard instructing managers to document performance issues for pregnant employees. Richard laughing about firing Lily before she could take maternity leave. These recordings were obtained illegally. Thomas started. Under Illinois Supreme Court precedent, recordings documenting ongoing illegal activity are admissible. Patricia cut him off smoothly. Your client was committing civil rights violations. Ms. Harrison was gathering evidence. We have legal opinions from 3 constitutional law professors supporting admissibility, and we're confident any judge will agree. She pulled up another file. But let's move beyond Ms. Harrison's recordings. Here are internal emails from Morrison Global's HR department showing complaints of discrimination that were systematically ignored or buried. The screen filled with emails. Dozens of them. Women reporting pregnancy discrimination. Employees of color reporting racial slurs and biased treatment. Complaints that went nowhere because HR reported directly to Richard. Where did you? Richard stood up, his composure cracking. Those are confidential company documents. Provided by a corporate officer with legal authority to disclose evidence of illegal activity, Patricia said calmly. Your sister Rebecca, who resigned from Morrison Global last week specifically to cooperate with this investigation. The color drained from Richard's face. Rebecca wouldn't. She did. Patricia pulled up more files. Board meeting minutes showing you explicitly discussed strategies to avoid discrimination lawsuits. Financial records showing pay disparities based on race and gender. Performance reviews revealing patterns of bias so clear that a first-year statistics student could prove discrimination. Judge Stevens was leaning forward now, his previous neutrality replaced by visible concern. There's more, Patricia continued. We have testimony from former clients who terminated contracts because of your discriminatory comments. We have statements from 12 current and former employees detailing hostile work environment. We have documentation of retaliation against employees who complained. And we have evidence that you personally orchestrated Miss Harrison's public termination as punishment for getting pregnant. She played the recording of Richard's phone call to Lily, where he'd offered money and made threats. Then the text messages. Then a recording from the airport that Lily hadn't even known existed, a passenger had captured Richard's "someone like you" comment and sent it to Patricia after seeing news coverage. Your Honor, Patricia said, this isn't a wrongful termination case. This is a federal civil rights violation involving systematic, documented, intentional discrimination spanning years. My client doesn't want $300,000. She wants justice. What do you want? Judge Stevens asked. Patricia slid a document across the table. Full reinstatement with back pay and benefits. $750,000 in compensatory damages. $2.5 million in punitive damages. A consent decree requiring Morrison Global to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training, independent HR oversight, and regular audits. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And legal fees. Thomas Berkshire looked like he might be sick. Richard's face had gone from pale to red, rage building behind his eyes. This is extortion, Richard hissed. You think you can come in here with your little recordings and destroy a 40-year-old company? I'll bury you in appeals. I'll spend every dollar I have making sure you get nothing. Mr. Morrison. Judge Stevens's voice cracked like a whip. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. But Richard was beyond caring. He stood up, pointing at Lily. You were nothing when I hired you. A nobody from nowhere with a mediocre degree and no connections. I gave you a chance, and this is how you repay me? By conspiring with my own sister to destroy everything I built? Everything you built? Lily's voice was quiet, but it carried through the room. It was the first time she'd spoken, and everyone turned to look at her. I saved your company $2.3 million. I fixed systems you couldn't understand. I worked through sickness and exhaustion while you took credit for my ideas. And when I got pregnant with a child you helped create, don't you dare. Richard snarled. That baby isn't. He stopped, suddenly aware that the mediator, the attorneys, everyone in the room was staring at him in shock. Finish that sentence, Patricia said softly. Please. The silence stretched like breaking glass. The baby isn't mine, Richard finally said, his voice low and venomous. We had a brief relationship years ago. She got pregnant to trap me, to get money. This whole lawsuit is a scam. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You just committed perjury, Mr. Morrison. You've repeatedly denied any personal relationship with Miss Harrison. You claimed her termination was purely professional. You've stated under oath in written discovery that you've never had any romantic or sexual involvement with her. She pulled up another document. This is a DNA test request we've had prepared for weeks, waiting to see if you'd lie about paternity. We already have evidence of your relationship texts, emails, hotel receipts that your company credit card paid for. We were going to request court-ordered DNA testing. But you just admitted it yourself in front of a federal mediator. Thomas Berkshire dropped his pen. Richard, stop talking. Right now. But Richard was beyond stopping. Years of getting away with everything, of never facing consequences, had left him incapable of recognizing when he'd lost. I don't care about your tests or your evidence, he spat. I have money, I have lawyers, I have power. And you? He looked at Lily with pure contempt. You're going to raise that baby in poverty while I continue living my life. Because that's how the world works. People like me win. People like you lose. The conference room door opened. Patricia had arranged the timing perfectly. 2 FBI agents walked in, followed by a representative from the Department of Labor. Mr. Richard Morrison? The lead agent held up credentials. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to violate federal labor laws. You have the right to remain silent. Richard's face went from red to white in seconds. What? No, this is Thomas, do something. But his lawyers were already backing away, hands up, making it clear they had no involvement in whatever their client had done. The witness intimidation charges stem from text messages and phone calls threatening Miss Harrison. The agent continued, reading from a document. The evidence tampering relates to deletion of company records after becoming aware of this investigation. And the conspiracy charges? He glanced at the general counsel. Those involve multiple corporate officers. As they handcuffed Richard Morrison in his $1,000 suit, Patricia leaned close to Lily and whispered, Your friend Janelle has been live streaming this entire hearing on a private feed to a journalist at the Tribune. Everything Richard just said is already being transcribed. It'll be published online in about 20 minutes. Lily watched them lead Richard toward the door, his lawyers frantically making phone calls. Thomas Berkshire looking like he was calculating how quickly he could resign. Wait, Lily said suddenly. Everyone stopped. Richard turned, his expression caught between rage and something that might have been fear. I just want you to know, Lily said quietly, her hand resting on her belly, that my daughter is going to grow up knowing her father abandoned her. But she's also going to know that when someone tried to destroy her mother fought back and won. That's the legacy you're leaving, Richard. Not your company, not your money. Just the knowledge that you were too small to recognize the value of the people around you. They led him away. Judge Stevens cleared his throat. Miss Chen, I'm recommending immediate settlement negotiations with new counsel for Morrison Global. I'm also forwarding my notes on this case to the appropriate authorities. Miss Harrison, you've shown remarkable courage. As they left the federal building, Lily's phone started buzzing uncontrollably. News alerts. Social media notifications. Messages from people she'd never met. The Chicago Tribune headline was already live. Morrison Global CEO arrested during mediation. Admits to pregnancy discrimination and false statements. By the time they reached Patricia's office, the story had gone viral. Video clips of Richard being led away in handcuffs. Excerpts from the recordings. Former employees sharing their own stories. The stock price of Morrison Global in free fall. Lily sat in Patricia's conference room, watching her phone light up with message after message, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. This is just the beginning, Patricia said, pulling up news coverage on the large monitor. The criminal charges, the civil suit, the Department of Labor investigation. The board will force him out. The company will settle to avoid worse publicity. Everything. How long? Lily asked. For full resolution? Maybe a year. But the important part, Patricia smiled. Richard Morrison's career is over as of 20 minutes ago. And yours? Yours is just beginning. If you've stayed with Lily's story this far, watching her transform from a woman fired in an airport terminal to someone who brought down a corporate tyrant, then you understand why the truth always finds its way to light, especially when backed by courage and evidence. Stay here because what happens next proves that justice, real justice, isn't just about punishment. It's about rebuilding. Lily Harrison stood at the podium of Northwestern University's Law School auditorium, 7 months after giving birth to her daughter Maya, addressing 200 future employment lawyers about the Morrison Global case that had become required reading in civil rights curricula across the country. The settlement was finalized 9 months after Richard's arrest, she explained, her voice steady and confident in a way that 29-year-old pregnant Lily, fired in an airport terminal, could never have imagined. Morrison Global paid $3.8 million distributed among 14 plaintiffs. Richard Morrison personally paid an additional $1.2 million in punitive damages after being convicted of witness intimidation and evidence tampering. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of Morrison Global's new executive team. Not a single Morrison family member among them. The consent decree mandated comprehensive reforms, independent HR oversight, mandatory anti-discrimination training, pay equity audits, and a whistleblower protection program. The Department of Labor monitors compliance quarterly, and perhaps most significantly, the board of directors now includes 4 women and 5 people of color who actually have voting power. A student raised her hand. What happened to Richard Morrison? Lily's expression remained neutral, professional. Mr. Morrison served 8 months in a minimum security facility for the federal charges. He was released last spring. His law licenses were revoked. He's permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. Last I heard, he was working as a consultant for his wife's family business in Connecticut, making approximately $60,000 a year. She didn't mention that Richard's wife had divorced him 2 months after his arrest, or that his lakefront penthouse had been sold to pay legal fees, or that 3 of his closest business associates had publicly disavowed him to save their own reputations. The facts spoke loudly enough without her adding commentary. And you? Another student asked, what did you do with the settlement money? I invested most of it conservatively for my daughter's future and my own security. But I also used it to start the Harrison Foundation for Workplace Justice. Lily pulled up the foundation's website on the screen. We provide legal assistance, counseling, and financial support to workers facing discrimination. Last year, we helped 83 people fight back against unfair treatment. 15 won settlements. 9 got their jobs back. All of them got their dignity back. After the lecture, as students lined up to ask questions and thank her, Lily checked her phone and saw a message from Patricia Chen. Appeals court just rejected Morrison's final challenge. Case is officially closed. We won. Again. Lily smiled and slipped the phone back in her pocket. She'd stopped celebrating Richard's losses months ago. His downfall was old news. Her focus now was building something that would outlast the revenge, outlast the headlines, outlast even her own story. That evening, Lily sat in her 2-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park, not luxurious, but comfortable, safe, and genuinely hers, feeding Maya, while reviewing applications for the foundation's next round of grants. Her daughter, now 7 months old, had her father's eyes, but thankfully nothing else of his. She was healthy, happy, and completely unaware that her existence had been the catalyst for corporate reform and federal prosecution. Your daddy is somewhere in Connecticut right now, Lily whispered to Maya, who grabbed at her mother's finger with surprising strength, probably still angry that a woman he called nothing took everything from him. But baby girl, here's what he'll never understand. I didn't take anything. He threw it all away himself the moment he chose cruelty over character. Her phone rang. Janelle calling from the HR firm where she'd recently been promoted to senior consultant, specializing in discrimination prevention training. Girl, you're not going to believe this. I just got contacted by a woman who worked at Morrison Global 5 years ago. She saw your story, found old emails proving she was passed over for promotion because of her age, and wants to file a complaint. Even with Richard gone, the company is still dealing with the culture he created. Send her to Patricia, Lily said, and let her know the foundation can help with costs if she needs it. After hanging up, Lily thought about the strange mathematics of justice. One woman fired in an airport had become 14 plaintiffs, which had become 83 people helped, which had become policy changes affecting thousands of workers, which had become case law that would protect millions. Richard Morrison had tried to make her invisible, irrelevant, erased. Instead, he created a force he couldn't control and couldn't stop. 3 weeks later, Lily received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Lily, you destroyed my life. I hope you're satisfied. Everything I built, gone. My reputation, my career, my marriage, all because you couldn't accept that some people are simply more capable of leadership than others. You'll always be what you were. A diversity hire who got lucky. And that baby you're using for sympathy? She grew up knowing her mother is a professional victim who ruins lives for money. You didn't win. You just dragged everyone down to your level. RM. Lily read it twice, then once more, waiting to feel anger or hurt or vindication. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Pity. Richard Morrison, even now, even after losing everything, still couldn't see the truth. He couldn't understand that competence isn't determined by skin color. That leadership isn't about domination. That strength sometimes looks like a pregnant woman standing up in a room full of people who wanted her silent. She took a photo of the letter and sent it to Patricia with a note. Adding this to the harassment file, but I don't think we need to do anything. He's already punished himself more than we ever could. That weekend, Lily attended a fundraising gala for the Chicago Urban Education Initiative, the same organization Richard's ex-wife still served on. Rebecca Morrison was there, having rebuilt her reputation through genuine reform work at other companies. How's Maya? Rebecca asked, looking at photos on Lily's phone. Perfect. Exhausting. Everything a baby should be. I'm glad. Rebecca paused. I heard Richard sent you a letter. Blaming you for his problems. He did. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. My brother had every advantage in life, every opportunity to be a good person. He chose differently. Rebecca's voice carried genuine regret. But watching what you've built from the wreckage he tried to create? That gives me hope that good people can still win. 6 months later, on the 2-year anniversary of her firing, Lily returned to Chicago O'Hare International Airport, not to serve anyone, but to speak at a workers' rights conference being held at the airport hotel. She walked through Terminal 3, past Gate 47 where Richard had publicly humiliated her, where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. A young black woman in a Morrison Global Logistics uniform was coordinating cargo operations at the desk, confidently directing her team. Lily didn't interrupt her work, but she noticed the woman's name tag. Kaisha, Operations Supervisor. Progress looked like Kaisha getting opportunities that used to be reserved for people who fit Richard's narrow definition of polish. At the conference, Lily gave the closing keynote to 300 airport workers, union representatives, and labor advocates. 2 years ago, I stood in this building as the lowest version of myself, she began. Broke, pregnant, publicly humiliated. Fired by a man who thought my existence was inconvenient to his image. And I want to be honest with you. In that moment, I considered giving up. Taking whatever settlement money I could get, signing the papers that would erase my voice, and disappearing quietly. She paused, looking out at faces that reflected her own story back at her workers, who'd been underestimated, overlooked, pushed aside. But here's what I learned. The people who try to silence you are counting on your fear being bigger than your courage. They're betting that you'll choose survival over justice, that you'll accept their version of who you are instead of fighting for the truth. And sometimes, honestly, survival is the right choice. There's no shame in that. But if you can fight, if you have even a small chance, even one piece of evidence, even one person who believes you, then fight. Because every victory, no matter how small, changes what's possible for the person who comes after you. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Later that night, Lily sat on her couch with Maya asleep on her chest, scrolling through messages from workers who'd attended the conference, sharing their own stories, asking for help, finding courage. She thought about Richard Morrison in Connecticut, probably still bitter, still convinced he was the victim, still unable to see that his cruelty had consequences. And she thought about the life she'd built from the ashes of that cruelty. A foundation helping others. A daughter who would grow up understanding justice. A legacy that meant something beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. Richard had tried to teach her a lesson about power, about knowing her place, about accepting that some people matter more than others. Instead, she taught him something more valuable. That character always outlasts position, that truth always outlasts deception, and that the person you underestimate might just be the one who changes everything. Lily Harrison had been fired for being pregnant, black, and inconvenient to a powerful man's image. 2 years later, she was a nationally recognized advocate, a foundation director, a mother, and living proof that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, it's building something so meaningful that they become irrelevant to your story. Richard Morrison had wanted to erase her. Instead, he'd erased himself. And somewhere in Connecticut, in a modest house he couldn't afford on his own, working a job that embarrassed him, Richard probably still didn't understand how completely he'd lost or why. But Lily understood. And so did every woman watching her story, learning from her courage and finding the strength to stand up and say, "Not to me, not anymore." That was the real victory. Not the money or the headlines or the criminal conviction. The real victory was every person who heard Lily's story and decided they deserved better. Every worker who documented discrimination instead of accepting it. Every whistleblower who spoke truth instead of staying silent. Richard Morrison destroyed one woman's career and accidentally sparked a movement. Lily Harrison took that destruction and built something beautiful. And if you're watching this story because you faced your own Richard Morrison, because you've been underestimated or dismissed or told you don't matter, then hear this. Document everything, find your allies, and never let someone else's limitations define your potential. The world needs your voice, your courage, your truth. Don't let them silence you.